Blockchain Show is a podcast that demystifies cryptocurrencies and distributed ledger technology.
Brian, welcome back. I know it's been a while. Thanks for joining me again.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm glad to be back.
I think last time we spoke was a year ago, 2 years ago. I think we were all talking about the FTX ad on the Super Bowl with Larry David, if that puts it in perspective.
It's been a while. We were probably all on lockdown at that time as well. And a lot's changed, I guess, since then.
Yeah. Oh, man. What a ride it's been. If you wouldn't mind maybe catching us up a little bit. I know that you've got a lot of exciting things that have happened with Fluree, but, just in case people missed the last couple podcasts.
Yeah, so a quick introduction to Fluree. Fluree is a data management open source technology. We're a database, if you will, but we have designed the database to really address a lot of the modern data challenges, not the challenges that historic databases were designed, which were kind of designed to sit and hold state behind, an application that someone was building. So we look more towards a future where there's machine readable data. You don't need a bunch of humans to sort of translate what data means between people, where data can be networked and automatically combined and composed. And of course, and I think near and dear to people in the blockchain space, where data in databases can be immutable and provable. So who updated what, when, can we verify that happened? And we even take it a step further, and we call them smart functions, but allow you to embed policy into the data tier, which includes things like permissions, who can update what. You can even introduce voting concepts as far as updating data states. But unlike a layer one blockchain, whose focus is a little bit more about providing like APIs into smart contracts, we're just incredibly focused at the data tier. So how do we manage data at its core level so that people can build many applications that might sit on top of it?
Yeah, very good. So last time we spoke, you were building a lot of momentum. So it's definitely curious to hear, where you're at now. I know that there was some, recent funding round. Kind of curious what that means for the company's current plans and maybe some future plans, if you wouldn't mind sharing.
Yeah, so we've continued to get traction. Our traction has come into the enterprise space more and more, which is, great if you're a company ultimately on a track to becoming profitable. Not everything you can do everything you do can't be purely in the open source world. So we've added to our product set. We have a new technology we call Fluree Sense, which helps migrate legacy data into these new formats where they can be, trusted and permissioned, like I just talked about. So our main open source technology, and I can get into some of our kind of enhancements around that, but that remains open source. It remains really the foundation of what we're trying to accomplish for Fluree. But now we're really building some capability around that to enable organizations to transition into that world. So yeah, expanding the product set and around what we now call Fluree Core, the core data management technology, a number of enhancements there, which happy to start talking about some of those and why we think they're important for the community.
Yeah, absolutely. Open source is a wonderful thing. And often I wonder, how do you make that profitable as business goes? Things change once money's involved. Obviously, many factors to consider make sense, but maybe you could just expand on that a little bit, because that's something that's kind of near and dear to me.
Yeah, and the open source model. Yeah, I think I guess a lot of companies have attacked it from different angles. The big example is, of course, Red Hat. And they made most of their money selling services agreements around the open source or providing a commercial license. There's a lot of companies that just have policies where they won't allow open source licenses. So that is something that we do have clients that do that in Fluree, but our focus has been a little bit more around adding new components around the core open source that just makes the core open source, more valuable for certain types of customers. So, when I brought up Fluree Sense, it's really focused on going out and using machine learning to automatically detect and locate different types of data you have in your organization, do what we call entity resolution automatically, which means if I find duplicates, maybe there's multiple systems holding customer data or other data, being able to automatically merge those, again, using machine learning to automate most of that process, and ultimately wrapping the important machine related semantics around the data that our main open source product, Fluree Core, would want to see, and what enables it to do all the magic it does as far as enforcing policy, permissions, combining data, composing data, decentralized data sets automatically. All that becomes, it's not a complete prerequisite for it, but all of that becomes very fluid once you have consistent semantics and vocabulary in front of data. So that Fluree Sense product is going to target things like organizations running SAP or Salesforce or a lot of these large legacy systems. They obviously have the ability, especially if they're looking to get their data into these new formats and do some of these things, they have the ability to pay for those services. And, a typical startup who is maybe using Fluree to power the data tier for whatever it is they're building, they don't need any of that. They can just still continue to use the open source technology that we have, and hopefully they're really successful with that. So we'd like to continue to add more of these kind of products around it that can target more enterprise users with some of the very specific needs that enterprise users have that allow them to get more value out of the open source itself.
Yeah, very good. I know that data is like the new oil, in today's business environment. There's controversy over privacy, but there's no doubt that the data is kind of crucial for the new era of business. If you could expand a little bit on Fluree's approach to the data-centric infrastructure, and maybe for those who are new to this space, how does that differ from some of the traditional database solutions? And maybe if you could just, briefly point out some advantages for those who may be interested to learn more.
Yeah, happy to. So, and I'll start before getting into slightly more specifics of this shift. You refer to data being the new oil. I mean, they all point to the same direction of the rise of data in importance to an organization. And one of the things that I think, if we look at kind of technology of the previous decades, software as a service has been immensely popular. People buy apps, and apps automate business processes, make them more efficient. And the value came from buying the apps. And we're entering an era now. There's a lot of powerful things that can happen with data that weren't easy to do not that long ago. But also that the apps are becoming more and more commoditized. When Salesforce.com was big, it replaced Siebel systems, which Oracle had acquired, and it was kind of like the main thing if you were going to do CRM. And Siebel cost an immense amount of money, so Salesforce was quite expensive. But now, of course, I'm sure even two-people startups often have CRM technology. It might come from Zoho or someone that isn't Salesforce.com. But it's so easy and accessible now to get any kind of app for your business. So what that's translating is the apps are becoming much more commoditized. It's not really where differentiation is happening. Where that differentiation is happening is in the data layer, and organizations' ability to leverage that data more effectively. So we really see this flip ultimately happening. In that flip is that you bought an app and the app stored data somewhere behind it. And effectively what you do is you're sending your data to the app. Where the shift is going to be organizations and, app providers, whatever it is, are going to focus on managing highly relevant structured data. And the app tier is going to become lighter and lighter and lighter. And I think we're seeing this happen. And I think, even things like generative AI might even accelerate this, where people can build apps much quicker. But what they can't build is highly accurate and trustworthy data like that. So that needs to become the focus. So yeah, it'll flip. You buy an app, it had data. Instead, you're going to manage your data and you're going to spin up small apps around that data. But then it also means that data layer has a lot of additional responsibilities. For one, it needs to exist in a many-to-many world, meaning there's many things updating the data. There might be many apps connecting to customer data, product data, whatever data it is. And there's many apps reading from it. So it creates scalability issues. How do you scale the reads, especially when you don't control all the reads? It might be people building apps. It brings up contention issues. How do you, leverage in a distributed and even decentralized way multiple services trying to make state transitions in the app, basically updating the database table? How do you control policy? Who's allowed to do what? And these are all things that a traditional database has never, ever had to deal with. They just sit behind an app. They're picked by the people who built the app. Their tables and columns were designed by the people who built the app. They weren't typically designed in a way that it might be used by a data scientist down the road to combine with other data or anything like that. That's why we have to spend a lot of time and energy building scripts and ETL processes to transform the data. We hear the term data silo, but that's what we have. We have a ton of data silos, and they were all developed by the developers who developed the app that it sits behind. Fluree Shift is enabling data to speak multiple vocabularies. When we talk about application integration, everyone knows it's a challenge, but what we are usually dealing with is the easy part is actually getting two machines to talk to each other. The hard part is they're talking completely different languages. It's like, I can call someone in France or Japan. That's not hard to do, but communicating with them is extraordinarily difficult because I don't speak either of those languages. And because our data is so siloed, we're unable to speak the same language. So there's a lot of great standards, a lot of them were initiated even by Tim Berners-Lee, the original Web3, if you will, that allowed global semantics and global IRI to be wrapped around data so that machines can automatically not only consume data, but understand exactly what it means with no translators in between. So we're very focused on that. We're very focused on dealing with these scale issues where you have unpredictable usage around data sets and you don't want to rely on a central authority to have to maintain infrastructure that's always available for people. So how do we scale out those reads and not require someone to pay for it on their own? The consumers can pay for the reads or the query on their own. How do we do that consensus where we have, distributed parties actually trying to update the same data? How do we do that reliably? So these are all the issues that we deal with that, a Postgres or a MySQL or a MongoDB, these are just problems that they never had to deal with. So they have no capability in there to work with them.
Yeah, very good. In a lot of ways, I feel like the initial buzz for blockchain technology is kind of subsiding. Could be just my perception, but maybe you could just describe it for those who feel maybe on the fence, say that they are in the business world and they're looking to maybe embrace some of the technology. Like, how would you convince them that blockchain-based solutions are still essential for the future of business?
Well, I think a lot of people who have focused, a number of years around the excitement and innovation in the space have had periods, and this is maybe one of them, where you feel raked over the coals a little bit. There's sort of the enthusiasm and the excitement, and then the troughs, and then something appears on the other side. And I think your question is, what's over the horizon that can keep people excited and ultimately will get a lot of traction. A lot of the initial traction I think happened, of course, around the speculation around token and assets, and that, of course, is really exciting. Continues to be exciting for a lot of people, but its staying power is going to, ultimately need to revolve around adding significant value to people who can pay for it, because that's how people make money. That's how things ultimately survive and don't die. So, I mean, it'll be no surprise that we're have always been and continue to be really bullish on the role of data and decentralized data networks. And we also think that, especially new excitement around or renewed excitement around AI. I think we've all probably been pretty blown away with the pace of innovation around certainly generative AI and LLMs over the last 6 months, and what we've finally kind of started to see. It's like, wow, this is really cool. I think that some of the things that we've been talking about for data become prerequisites to bringing trust and accuracy to these types of technologies. So I think that data. I mean, I've said a long time ago that I think the real killer app for decentralization and blockchain technology is data. It's not necessarily the tokens or the smart contracts. I have no idea whether that's really going to be correct or not. I think there's a chance it will be. I think if anything, it's going to provide a big, just a really valuable use case for utilizing this technology. And organizations, institutions, even countries are going to increasingly be in the situation where for them to be effective, they have to make sense out of data quicker. And one of the best ways to do that, beyond just getting your own house in order as it relates to your own data, because a lot of organizations have an immense amount of data we call dark data that'll never be used. It's stored, you have it, but it's dark. It's not leverageable. So certainly reducing dark data, but then the value really becomes to how do you collaborate around that data in real time across your networks, across organizational boundaries. And that's then where things like trust and a consistent ordering of, truth becomes critical. So I think that's still on the horizon. I think we're already seeing some examples where that's providing a lot of value. And I think that's going to be a big enterprise use case. I also think, I mean, since I brought up AI, it seems like it's, getting tired of talking about AI, but it is pretty amazing what's happening. I think as well, when we think about things like auto GPT or these, using that as an example of these autonomous agents that are going out and just performing things automatically. Those agents at some point are going to be needing to make financial transactions. And they're not going to sort of stroll up to Bank of America and open up an account. They are going to need automated ways to be able to do these sorts of things. And what better way could there be except for, our L1 blockchains that are out there right now for exchanging assets and doing things. So I think the more and more we empower machines to act autonomously, the more and more important decentralization technologies become, not only on the data side, which is of course where my bias is, but even on the monetary exchange, token, and smart contract side. I think there's still a ton of huge opportunity in front of us.
Yeah, certainly exciting. Yeah, it just seems like AI has exploded in the last 3 months. It's just kind of wild to me. I mean, we would talk about some of the stuff in the podcast years and years ago about, IoT devices being able to do microtransactions and, that sort of thing. And now it's like, I think it's just in people's conscious, it's like, yeah, that totally makes sense. That totally seems like the natural progression. It's just, I don't know, for some reason I thought it would be further out. I don't know. It almost seems like a rebranding in a lot of ways. We used to refer to things as like bots or just software, but now it's just kind of strange to me. As a kid, you think of AI, you think of like, Terminator, Skynet, or Ex Machina, that sort of thing. But it's like, it's just fascinating to be alive during this period. So yeah, no, it's very cool. I'm glad you brought that up.
Yeah, I totally agree. And those are all some of my, favorite movies from my childhood. And of course, with Ex Machina, that's not even that old, but what an amazing movie. And yeah, actually starting to see some of this maybe happen. And I think too, as humans, we always have a hard time making the mental leap, large leaps of technology advancement. It's just hard to imagine. And it's a lot easier to deal with it in small chunks. And so I think, we have seen and sort of talked about some of these concepts, but it's been very difficult, I think, to connect the dots. Like, I don't know if you talk about a smart thermostat doing transactions. I mean, yeah, sort of makes sense. And there's probably, people have had smart meters for a long time. I guess some of that's kind of in a small sense already been happening for a while, but you start to now package up like seeing is believing some of these advancements over the last 3 months, and then all of a sudden you're starting to, which I wouldn't have thought about. I'm sure a lot of people were talking about, I wouldn't have thought about like how important a Ethereum might be to artificial intelligence and connecting those dots. But you actually see the progress that's been made, and all of a sudden it becomes, wow, okay, now I can really start to envision this world where those dots get connected and all this stuff's actually happening. But before it was just, a bunch of people kind of spouting off some future that we may or may not happen, but we see ourselves getting there. So, yeah, I think we're starting to just see some of these incremental stepping stones towards that future. And they're big stepping stones. They're not little stepping stones that we're seeing, but it's allowing us to then stand on that next, perch and look out and sort of, start believing some of the things that maybe we talked about, but didn't fully believe not that long ago. I think it's exciting.
Absolutely. You're speaking a lot to trustworthiness of data and truth, and definitely good things. What are maybe some specific challenges or pain points that Fluree Solutions addresses when it comes to data management and security, and where like some of the more traditional ways of going about it just don't even come close?
Yeah, so we focus, on kind of two main capabilities that have a lot of features inside of each one that make them possible. But one is, zero trust, which is, of course, a term that we've all heard a lot. But this idea that any piece of information and its provenance can be fully validated by any service without requiring an intermediary at all. And so the zero trust, we apply that not only to, obviously that could mean just signing pieces of data, which of course we do, but we extend that also into policy, which is kind of like, the equivalent of what you might do with a smart contract using Solidity and Ethereum or something like that. But effectively, you're encoding policy rules around how that data can be updated by whom and under what conditions directly into the data tier. And sometimes we, refer to this whole set of capability as data needs the ability to defend itself, especially if you start exposing it to, a network. The other kind of main category of capability that brings this future into focus for us is we call zero integration. So zero trust, zero integration. Zero integration means that a machine has the ability to get data if it knows where it's at and be able to automatically know what that data means. And today, this is, effectively impossible without injecting humans into it. I mentioned our Fluree Sense technology, which can use some machine learning to be able to learn patterns around certain types of data, so that even if that data exists in something like SAP, which has a large number of database tables in it and a bunch of columns. All those columns have like 6 or 8 characters, and they're all abbreviations of German words. Like you would just never, ever know by looking at the raw data. A machine could never know what that data actually means. So we can use machine learning to help discover, fingerprints, if you will, of certain types of data to auto-discover it. But largely, you're going through this process of taking very siloed and proprietary data and trying to expose it in a way where machines can automatically understand what that means. The best way of doing this is you encode it using vocabularies and semantics. And, we rely heavily on the W3C standards around encoding data like this. We prefer people interact with Fluree using JSON LD. So LD stands for linked data, but it's a way of serializing RDF data, which is a very, basic way of representing any piece of information. And, ultimately we're helping to build graphs that can connect to other data sources or distributed data sources automatically and materialize them as though they're a single large database. So these are some of the capabilities. When you get into data sharing, you get into data sharing across boundaries, you get into machines automatically discovering data. How do they, validate things? It's really building the parallel to the World Wide Web in the data web. And in the World Wide Web, humans are the user. We use the World Wide Web through a web browser. There's a bunch of things around that. There's standard markup, so the web browser knows how to render a web page. There's a little lock icon that'll appear in your address bar, which means that the data, you have a secure channel and there's no way that web page could be manipulated. And it really is, Google's website or Microsoft's website that you're dealing with. Building a parallel network for data that machines can use that have all of those capabilities. It has the equivalent of that lock icon. They have the ability to verify the data hasn't been tampered with, that information is really coming from organization X, Y, or Z as it's being pulled in. Those are all the capabilities that are designed in the core into Fluree to ultimately enable.
Yeah, very good. Speaking about, again, to those maybe who are having trouble wrapping their heads around the concept, do you have any maybe some real world use cases where Fluree's tech, has either demonstrated significant value for clients in terms of their business success, longevity, or just maybe any examples that people have been able to demonstrate?
Yeah, I'll highlight a couple. And I think, too, talking about some of our recent features and tying those into technologies that different folks might already be familiar with can also connect the dots. And maybe I start from there real quick because it's a little bit more technical approach to it. But, I already talked about Fluree Core, main open source technology. It's effectively a database, but a database with this ability to be, decentralized and have many to many parties interacting with data, collaborating around data. In many ways, it treats data sort of like if anyone's a developer, they're certainly familiar with Git or GitHub. It treats databases much like that. You're building commits. Those commits can be signed. You can branch. You can fork. You can know exactly where you are at any moment in time. Very familiar with anyone who's kind of has some good concepts around how Bitcoin works or anything as well, because a lot of those concepts are similar. Consensus is different, but the concepts are similar. So one of the things that we've focused on a lot with Fluree here recently is this idea of being more content addressable for an entire set of data or even connected sets of data. So IPFS, I think, has brought sort of the concepts and the paradigm of being content addressable to the blockchain world. A lot of people use IPFS. Of course, it's used a lot for NFTs or, off-chain storage for all kinds of smart contracts. So IPFS makes content like a file self-addressable. Fluree makes an entire database that can actually be updated over time, content addressable. And partially for this reason, we've enhanced our IPFS integration and support. So Fluree can actually write out its commits or blocks as data changes directly into IPFS. But the other thing that we've now introduced is, and this will give you an address basically. So every database in the world can have a unique address that's content addressable. That address might include IPFS as the protocol. So you could get to it through any IPFS gateway. You can load up the database and view it. But it might also exist in a private Amazon S3, or it might exist just on your file system. So it's possible to create and manage a database anywhere with any sort of storage protocol and have it be content addressable. And if I hand you that address for the database, if you have access to the storage, in the case of IPFS, everyone has access to the storage, you can actually load up and start querying the database using your local resources or stand things up. One of the challenges that comes in with even NFTs is, well, how do I update it? Well, in some cases, you don't never want to because you bought a piece of art or an old video clip, that you're never going to update. But if you want to, have this be an asset that's in a multiplayer game or something like that, perhaps attributes about these things can change over time. And this idea of a mutable NFT exists, but in a content address world, making updates is extraordinarily difficult because you have a completely new file, a completely new location. How do you let the world know about this? So Fluree has now abstracted what we call the name service layer out of Fluree, which is where you can consult the latest version for a given database where it lives. And any database can have as many name services as you want, but a layer one blockchain becomes a really interesting place to put a name service. So you could use Ethereum to protect who is allowed to update a pointer to the latest version of a database as it's getting updated. IPNS, which if you're using IPFS, you might use the name service that they've built in, might be a name service that you choose to use as far as how do you look up what the latest version of a database is. So abstracting that and its role in sort of layer one technologies, I think is where we see a lot of integration between Fluree being an updatable database, but connecting directly into a layer one or a smart contract. The other integration point comes into, a lot of Fluree and its control and permissions. I've mentioned this: who updated what, how has it changed, do they have permission to change? Of course, all that revolves around provable identity. So provable identity in the form of a decentralized identifier is the preferred way to, ensure this happens. And of course, the DID, for those who are focused on decentralized identity, there's DID methods where, Ethereum manages your DID, or other layer ones or smart contracts, or where you're embedding your decentralized identifiers and potentially keeping them updated. Fluree can natively work with those as far as proving identity. So those are some of kind of the integration points between like a layer one blockchain world and sort of Fluree as this provable data tier. As far as use cases, we try to break the world into similar to, I guess, the blockchain space into kind of the data 1.0 world, the data 2.0 world, and the data 3.0 world, with the idea that everyone wants to eventually get to data 3.0, much like, we might talk about Web 3.0. So data 1.0 is, I'm just like getting some of the data out of my core systems, and maybe I'm storing it in a data lake or data warehouse, and maybe I have a simple data catalog. Data 2.0 is kind of, okay, now I need to really, in a efficient way, start combining data sets. And this is where like data normalization happens and, a more sophisticated level of data usage. Data 3.0 is really where I think ultimately you have this fully decentralized data network. And so those are the most exciting use cases that we see. And we see these mostly with people who are building decentralized apps, but more sophisticated decentralized apps that actually require a robust database layer. A lot of decentralized apps that we see today are pretty simple. Pravica is one that I would point out that's building decentralized Slack. And Fluree manages the messages, the chat. It's combined in this case with Blockstacks, which is doing the identity management that we talked about. And also some, basic sort of simple state management that makes the whole network happen. FabricPay is another exciting app built on Fluree, where they've created a token called Social Cash, which Fluree also manages, and it's programmed into the Fluree core tier how to basically create a token at the data level, where advertisers can target consumers, meaning certain provable demographics, to watch ads. And if those consumers watch the ads, they get paid directly to do that. So it's sort of taking out Google and Facebook from being in the middle of using kind of third-party intent data to try and target ads, and then taking most of the money and connecting advertisers with consumers, to enabling consumers to actually own their own provable data and have brands target them. They control what data and information they release to whom. And then, of course, they end up getting paid directly to target that. And just a practical example might be that, if the brand knows that I, purchased a BMW 3 years ago and I'm Audi, that might be, the appropriate time that a BMW owner typically buys a new car. And so that's an extraordinarily valuable consumer for me to directly target. And I'm able to do that not based on third party, they happen to search for Audis, but maybe they were doing it for their wife or their friend. Instead, first party provable data where you can target advertisers. In a third example I'll point out, which is a really exciting one that has pretty big implications, I think, for everybody who's ever looked for or found a job, is the Trusted Learner Network. And Fluree's powering the whole backbone to this network. The network has a number of higher ed education institutions engaged with it. It includes Arizona State, who's really leading the effort, Georgia Tech, MIT, and ultimately all these universities create a data backbone where a student can come in and actually prove that they own an identity. If any of those institutions is able to make the connection between a student that went there and a decentralized identity, they can effectively expose and allow these students to get education credentials, transcripts, degrees, provable in the form of a verifiable credential, directly in a wallet on their phone, much like, you'd have a wallet for trading cryptocurrencies, you have a wallet for data, provable data. And then, of course, when you're applying for a job, this we expect, one of the parts of an application process is, give us your provable transcripts, give us your provable degree. And one of the neat things about verifiable credentials and what they're doing is, of course, you can wrap these in what's called a verifiable presentation. It's a zero knowledge proof where you can say, okay, I just want to prove I have my whole transcript. I just want to prove I have a bachelor's degree. I don't want you to see my GPA. I don't want you to see the classes I took, et cetera. So, those are kind of three very different examples, but they all deal with really distributed and even decentralized trusted data networks that Fluree can help enable.
That's fascinating. Yeah, thank you for explaining all that. I think that really helps to put it in perspective for a lot of people listening. Kind of looking ahead, what's your vision for Fluree and the role it'll play in shaping the future of data management and some of these blockchain-based solutions?
Yeah, our R&D is looking at kind of three areas right now. One is a shorter term, which is we're launching a cloud network of Fluree nodes that Fluree can actually operate Fluree for you. So we have our open source technology today, and anyone using Fluree is running it on their own. They're running it in their environment or somewhere. So and a lot of people don't want to. So we believe we can create a GitHub-like experience for provable, interconnectable data that can exist anywhere. That data might exist in IPFS. You might have us store it for you. You might have it stored somewhere else, but actually creating this GitHub-like environment where people can find data, they can post data, that can allow their data to be queried by third parties and connected with other data sources. So that is something that's currently in private beta, and people can register for this on our website if they're interested in getting included in that. The other piece we're doing a lot of R&D into right now is around secure multi-party computation. So, Fluree can wrap this policy around data, not only for writes, but if the data is decided to keep private, also for reads. So you may have, 4 data sets combined in a large data set you're trying to query. 2 may be public, 2 may be private. As long as I can see these private data sets, I can look at these as though they're all part of one database. And because we have the ability to map these vocabularies together, we can automatically know what the data sets are talking about as long as you're using some of these standards and make that happen. So there's another level of privacy that we think is of growing importance. And there's ways using, sort of a branch of zero knowledge cryptography to be able to share data in a specific way where you never actually, or I should say, share data analytics without ever exposing a single piece of actual data. So if multiple organizations or entities wanted to find, how many customers they had in common in the state of Texas, or whether or not any consumer has a life insurance account over, a certain threshold, or what the total amount of life insurance is across multiple providers, but they don't want to disclose the person's name or any identifiable information, this whole kind of subfield of cryptography can do some really interesting things. There's a lot of limitations around it as well. You can't do, a lot of the analytics that you can do around it are pretty limited, but very valuable in many use cases. So exposing a front end in front of a private Fluree ledger that can allow it to participate in this form of multi-party computation to expose certain analytics with kind of trading partners around data, we see as a real opportunity around data privacy and data ownership. And especially as we see the trends where, the web browsers are disabling third-party cookies, it's limiting how advertisers are able to find out information about different consumers or different patterns. This whole kind of field we see is emerging. So that's another area that we're focused on right now.
Yeah, I appreciate you taking the time to explain this to the audience, coming back on. It's been a real pleasure speaking with you. If you want to leave us with anything, where people can go to learn more or potentially get involved, please feel free to do that.
Yeah, sure. So, GitHub is where we manage all of our code. And so github.com/Fluree for anyone who wants to, get more involved in what the code is, the different libraries, that's a great place to go. Of course, our website, fluree.ee. As far as just finding out more information, maybe downloading a binary if you want to run Fluree on your laptop. Or registering for something like our cloud version of Fluree that I mentioned is in private beta. That's a good location to go to for any of that.
Awesome. Well, Brian, thank you so much for your time. It's always a pleasure speaking with you. Yeah, I really appreciate you and the work you're doing.
Great. Well, thanks, Ethan. Thanks for having me back.
My pleasure.